The sand beneath the legionaries' feet trembled as if the very earth feared what was about to happen. A hum hung in the air, like the breath of a beast ready to break free from its cage. Dozens of people pulled creaking ropes, drawing back a bowstring made of twisted sinews. A moment later, a crack rang out, and a heavy bolt as thick as an arm whistled through the air, carrying death a distance of 400 meters. Could ancient man create a weapon that in power and accuracy resembled a sniper rifle? And how did they manage to instill terror in entire armies long before the invention of gunpowder? The answer to this question is hidden in inventions that changed the very concept of war: the Scorpion and the Ballista. But how exactly they became symbols of Roman genius is a story not just about machines, but about people for whom accuracy was more important than fear. The Romans called their projectile machines torsiones, from the Latin word twisting. Their power was born not from weight, but from taut bundles of sinews, twisted to their limit, like a soldier's nerves before battle. It was this mechanical heart that allowed the Scorpion to hurl arrows with such speed that, according to the historian Vigidius, they pierced shield and armor through and through. Archaeologists found remains of one such machine at the site of the Battle of Numantia: iron bolt heads and bronze bushings charred from the heat of the siege. Each fragment reminded that the Romans built their power not by numbers, but by skill. The Scorpion is not just a projectile machine, it is the concentrated will of Rome's engineers. Its bowstring of ox sinews, dry and ringing, sounded before the shot like a muffled cry, short but a harbinger of death. The wooden stock, sheathed in bronze, was cold and smooth, like the skin of a snake ready to strike. When the centurion gave the order to fire, the sound of metal striking the air was akin to a clap of thunder on a clear day, sudden, piercing, impossible to forget. He who stood before the Scorpion saw only a brief flash of sunlight on the arrowhead, and did not have time to realize that his life was already over. The Romans used these machines in sieges and field battles, deploying them in rows behind the first line of legions. Commanders knew no enemy phalanx would withstand if its formation were broken by several steel arrows at once. Polybius wrote that Scorpions opened battle, forcing the enemy to lose formation density before the legionaries went on the attack. But the main marvel of Roman engineering lay not only in the machine itself, but in the system that allowed it to be created by the tens. Each legion had specialists, ballista engineers, people responsible for the accuracy and calibration of projectile weapons. They were considered no less important than centurions, for the trajectory of an iron bolt depended on their calculations. To assemble a Scorpion, almost as much labor was required as for crafting a legate's armor. Every part was precisely carved. Every sinew was tensioned with consideration for the angle and air humidity. Thus began a new era of war, an epoch when Romans first made death mathematically precise. Yet, in that silence between shots, amidst stretched ropes and the smell of resin, lay hidden something more than mere engineering calculation. It was a sense of power over the elements, a moment when man first realized he could send death further than his eye could see. It was this very moment that made Rome what it became. And soon, when the Scorpion would yield its place to its more powerful sister, the Ballista, war would transform into an art where stones and iron would decide the fates of empires. When Roman legions began preparations for a siege, everything turned into a meticulously orchestrated ritual. The ground trembled not from the tramp of soldiers, but from the blows of blacksmiths' hammers. There, on the outskirts of the camp, weapons capable of crushing cities were born. The Ballista, the Scorpion's elder sister, was the embodiment of Rome's engineering madness. Its enormous arms of ash and bronze were drawn back with winches, and its bowstrings, made of twisted sinews of bulls and horses, required constant wetting to prevent drying out under the sun. A single shot cost hours of work for dozens of people, but the price was justified, for the ballista could hurl a stone weighing tens of kilograms a distance of over 400 meters. The Romans called such masters tormentarii, specialists in tension machines. They were engineers, mathematicians, and artisans simultaneously. Their knowledge was passed down from generation to generation and guarded as a secret. The legate trusted them more than even his centurions, for a tormentarius's error could cost victory. For an accurate shot, they used wooden sight with markings, calculating the angle of inclination, wind force, and air density. This was not just a calculation, it was a ritual of precision. And when the enormous bowstring released its stone, it flew not by chance but strictly along a verified trajectory, as if subservient to the will of the gods. According to Livy, during the siege of Amphipolis, ballistas demolished walls as if they were struck by the hammers of titans. Contemporaries said that the sound of their shots could be heard for many miles, and it struck terror even in those who did not witness the impact itself. A stone launched from a ballista not only shattered masonry, it broke the enemy's morale. Imagination painted the moment. Enemy soldiers on the walls see an approaching dark circle like their own fate. An impact, the crack of stone, a scream, dust settling on helmets, and then silence again, filled with fear. The ballista did not operate alone. Each shot was accompanied by the rhythm of commands, the beat of a drum, the clang of chains. Scorpions were deployed on the front line, light and fast, striking at living targets. Behind them were heavy ballistas, designed for destroying fortifications. Their deployment tactics resembled a modern artillery barrage, first ranging shots, then area bombardment. Historians note that Caesar in the Gallic War used ballistas to suppress enemy phalanxes before an assault. They didn't just clear the path, they broke the will to resist. The term catapult then denoted a general class of projectile machines, but the Romans distinguished them clearly. The scorpion for arrows, the ballista for stones. This difference was like between an archer and a siege master. The ballista featured rotating levers mounted in a rigid frame. These were twisted by sinew ropes, accumulating energy like a spring. Upon firing, the levers unwound, launching the projectile with unimaginable speed. Modern reconstructions show the force of impact reached such a level that even iron gates were breached after several hits. The logistics of these machines were no less impressive. To transport a ballista to the battlefield required up to 40 mules and dozens of soldiers. The weight of some specimens reached 3 tons. Moreover, each part was marked with the legion's emblem so that nothing would be confused during disassembly and transport. Archaeological finds near Carthage have unearthed bronze bushing stamped with Leg X, Caesar's 10th Legion. This proves that the machines were standardized, like weapons of mass production. During a march, ballista components were transported on wagons, and assembly took from 3 to 6 hours. Every warrior knew their task: who secures the uprights, who tensions the sinews, who checks the bowstring. The centurion commanded this process with the precision of a general, for delay meant the risk of being caught off guard. Even the simple tensioning of a rope was a matter of calculation. Humidity, temperature, wind direction, everything mattered. The Romans treated their machines like living beings, requiring care and discipline. Plutarch wrote that before a ballista fired, soldiers often froze in anticipation, as if before an earthquake. The tense silence, the smell of hot oil and resin, a rare shout of command, and then a roar, unmistakable for anything else in the world. It was the sound of mechanical fury, created by human hands. And it was this sound, the hum of the Roman ballista, that became a symbol of an era when engineering first transformed into a weapon of power. But every force has its limit. The Romans understood no machine, however perfect, wins without the will of the people behind it. And where steel and wood clashed with flesh, the true drama of war began, the moment when precise calculation turned into chaos. It was then that the Roman army first encountered an enemy who not only withstood the blows of ballistas, but also used them against the Romans themselves. Summer, heat, stone walls. The year, 153 BC. The siege of Numantia in Spain became one of the most difficult trials for the Roman army. There, where legions usually prevailed by numbers and discipline, they faced an adversary who would not surrender even to ballistas. The Spaniards, trapped behind strong walls, knew that behind them lay only death, and this very fact made them more dangerous than any legion. The Romans encircled the city with a wall almost 20 kilometers long, turning the siege into a ring where each machine had its place. On that day, the ground beneath Numantia trembled from the shots of ballistas, and the air was thick with dust, stone, and fear. On the front line, scorpions were at work, light, maneuverable, deadly. These machines resembled giant metal insects, their taut sinews glistening in the sun like a reptile's scales. Each shot was accompanied by a dull crack as the bowstring, releasing, flung a bolt as thick as a finger. The bolt, with a hardened iron tip, pierced through shield, then armor, then body, and plunged into the earth with the same sound an axe makes cleaving wood. Soldiers called this sound the scorpion song. The term centuria meant a unit of approximately 80 men, and they were the ones who operated the scorpions in combat conditions. Each centurion monitored the firing rhythm to ensure the weapons did not overheat or break from tension. An error could cost a life. If a bowstring snapped, the metal lever would lash out with enough force to crush a skull. But fear was a familiar companion to the legionary, and it did not hinder the execution of orders. Romans conquer not by numbers, but by training, wrote Vegetius. And at Numantia, this assertion became evident. Where another people would have fallen into panic, the Romans turned battle into a procedure, precise as the movement of gears. Ballistas, meanwhile, aimed higher, at walls, towers, gates. One shot, described by Livy, destroyed part of a fortress tower, killing dozens of defenders. But the Numantians learned quickly. They began to use wooden screens, raise defensive shields, and place sacks filled with wool and earth on the walls. The Roman stones no longer broke the walls so quickly, and the siege dragged on. Then Commander Scipio Aemilianus ordered a change in tactics. Ballistas began to fire not only stones, but also clay pots filled with burning pitch. When such pots shattered, dense smoke enveloped the city, flames rose to the sky, and it seemed as if the very air was burning. The Romans knew how to turn engineering knowledge into a psychological weapon. They knew an enemy blinded by fear is already halfway defeated. The historian Appian wrote that night bombardments were accompanied by torches, and burning bolts flew across the sky like stars falling to earth. This image was no exaggeration. Fire, reflected in helmets, cast long shadows on the faces of warriors, and even experienced soldiers felt as if they were participating in something supernatural. But war is not only about technology. It is about attrition. The legions lost strength, provisions, patience. Each day demanded effort, and ballistas required care like living beings. Their bowstrings stretched, and the tormentarii lubricated them with a mixture of fat and wax to maintain elasticity. The machines were disassembled and reassembled, angles and fastenings checked. Even on a silent night, when no shot sounded, a faint creaking could be heard in the camp. Soldiers tightened ropes, checked bows, prepared for a new day. Archaeologists found traces of charred structures and metal wedges used to fix the ballista frames beneath Numantia. These findings confirmed the descriptions of ancient authors. The Romans did not abandon their machines, even when they lost men. For them, weapons were an extension of their will, and if a man fell, another took his place, without breaking rhythm. When the walls of Numantia finally fell, Scipio did not order an assault on the city. He knew the inhabitants were already doomed. They set fire to their homes and died, denying Rome a triumphant victory. Yet it was in this siege that a new approach to war was born. Now, machines became not just an auxiliary means, but a key to dominance. Ballistas and scorpions proved that engineering could decide the fate of battles. But this was only the first chapter of Roman artillery. Soon, these machines would become not only siege weapons, but also part of mobile armies. Rome learned to carry death with it, turning every field into a fortress. And then the very concept of battle changed forever. Distance ceased to be salvation. It was the 1st century BC. Rome was expanding its borders, and with each new campaign, the legions became not just an army, but a moving war machine. Now ballistas and scorpions accompanied troops not only during sieges, but also in field battles. They were no longer fully disassembled. Engineers devised lighter constructions on wheeled carriages. These mobile artillery machines could follow the column and deploy in a matter of minutes. Polybius wrote that a legion equipped with such machines struck before the enemy could close in. Thus, the world's first mobile artillery was born. Then, one of the most brilliant commanders, Gaius Julius Caesar, enters the scene. In his commentaries on the Gallic War, he mentions scorpions and ballistas as a decisive factor in the victory at the Battle of Alesia. There, where tens of thousands of Gauls commanded by Vercingetorix opposed the Romans, it was the precision of the machines that allowed the defense to hold. When the Gauls stormed the fortifications, scorpions opened fire on the slopes, and ballistas shattered the siege towers. Caesar wrote that no warrior could hide from the arrows and stones falling from the sky. This was not a metaphor. It was a mechanical storm engineered by human hands. At this moment, the word ballista began to sound like a symbol of discipline and calculation. Unlike the chaotic armies of barbarians, the Romans acted as a single organism. Each centurion knew his sector, each tormentarius his aim. Before a shot, when the entire machine was drawn to its limit, the commander uttered one short word, "Emitte," let go, and hundreds of pounds of tense energy were released instantly, sending death in a straight line, as if Jupiter himself had hurled a lightning bolt. The term legatus referred to the commander of a legion, a representative of the Senate itself. A legate was not merely a general, but also an administrator, responsible for organizing the camp and supplies. It was under his supervision that engineers, blacksmiths, carpenters, and throwers operated. The Romans transformed every temporary camp into a true fortress. Earthen ramparts, ditches, wooden towers, and between them rows of scorpions pointed outwards. The camp breathed like a living creature, every element having a function, and the ballistas were its muscles. Historian Goldsworthy noted that a distinctive feature of the Roman army was its ability to systematize any weapon. Machines were assembled according to standard blueprints, their caliber and dimensions adjusted for unified projectiles. Even the bolts had strictly defined lengths and weights to maintain ballistic consistency. Archaeological excavations in Mainz and Carnuntum have revealed iron arrowheads identical in form, confirming that Rome had already introduced practical standardization of ammunition. During Caesar's campaign across the Rhine, his engineers built a bridge in 10 days, and it was from that bridge, as described by Plutarch, that the Romans fired scorpions at the Germans to maintain distance. This moment became a symbol of a new era. Rome learned to shoot from a distance, keeping its lines inviolate. Warriors no longer rushed into close combat with desperation. They won by calculation. Their shields deflected arrows, and their machines sent death back. The ballista reached the peak of its perfection during these years. Its range extended to 400 meters, and its impact force allowed it to destroy towers and walls. The tension mechanism, consisting of 2 torsion springs, became so precise that experienced tormentarii could adjust the tension by sound. They knew that the correct voice of the sinew sounded like a low moan in the wind. An error in tension by a single turn could change the flight range by tens of meters. These masters felt the machine as a musician feels an instrument. During the siege of Alesia, when the Gauls launched their last desperate attack, the ballistas fired continuously. Caesar wrote that the air was filled with the whistling of arrows and the thunder of stones, and the entire battlefield was enveloped in dust. Falling stones crushed siege towers, and bolts pierced both men and planks simultaneously. The Gauls, losing formation, scattered, and it was then that the legionaries advanced. This was a perfect union of engineering and bravery. The machine opened the way, man finished the job. But even such power had its limits. Ballistas could not fire up steep slopes or into dense forests, and Rome's enemies quickly learned to use the terrain to deprive the machines of their advantage. Then the Romans responded to the challenge. They began to create lighter scorpions, suitable for maneuver warfare. These models could be carried on the shoulders of 4 soldiers. They did not shoot as far, but faster and more frequently. Tactics shifted. Now artillery became not only destructive, but also mobile. During this time, the position of praefectus fabrum, prefect of engineers, appeared in the army. He commanded all technical specialists, responsible for the construction and repair of weapons. Under his leadership, ballistas were cared for like sacred objects. They were lubricated, covered with oil, and shielded from dust with cloth. For the legionaries, these were not just machines, but a guarantee of life. For if the enemy reached them, it meant the line of defense was already collapsing. Yet behind every shot, behind every taut sinew, lay not only engineering precision, but also human tension. Soldiers knew that any mistake meant death. Sometimes ropes snapped, and pieces of metal tore through the bodies of those standing nearby. But the Romans did not retreat. They believed if even a machine can be inconsistent, a human must be steadfast. This belief became what transformed mechanical weapons into a symbol of Roman power. However, an adversary awaited them, against whom neither precision nor bronze nor discipline could save them. Eastern armies brought new types of machines, new methods of destruction to the battlefield, and Rome felt for the first time that its own creations could be turned against it. The 2nd century AD, the empire at its peak of power. Legions stand from Britannia to Syria, from the Rhine to the Euphrates. But with the growth of territories, challenges also grow. Eastern armies, Parthians, Armenians, Persians, begin to use their own projectile machines. Rome, for the first time, faces a reflection of itself. Battles are now fought, not only by men, but also by mechanisms, and when the roar of a scorpion sounds over the desert, its echo answers from the other side, for the enemy is now firing a captured Roman ballista. At this moment, history comes full circle. Roman engineering becomes a weapon against Rome. The battlefield changes. Warriors no longer see the enemy face to face. Death arrives from a distance, invisible, fast, without warning. Plutarch wrote that, in battles in the East, men fell without hearing the shot, only feeling the rush of wind. This was no exaggeration. A scorpion bolt flew at speeds of up to 150 meters per second. Visually, it was almost impossible to spot. One moment, and the bronze tip pierced armor clean through, as if the man were made of wax. The term ballistician in Rome referred not only to the machine operator, but also to the master of calculation. These people were living instruments. They could estimate an angle by the sun, distance by steps, wind force by the movement of smoke. A Roman legate attached special importance to them, for the outcome of battle was increasingly decided not by swords, but by the accuracy of shots. In the armies of Trajan and Hadrian, ballistic engineers received higher pay than ordinary centurions. This was a new type of warrior, a man of intellect, armed with mechanics. In the east, the Romans first employed siege ballistas with a counterweight system, a prototype of future trebuchet mechanics. Archaeologists in Syria have found bronze plates and lever fragments that could belong to these later models. Such machines hurled not only stones but also iron balls covered in pitch. They ignited upon impact, and enemy walls caught fire. This was no longer just war. It was an engineering apocalypse. During Trajan's campaign against the Parthians, according to Dio Cassius, the Romans used ballistas when crossing the Tigris. The machines were mounted on rafts which floated down the river, bombarding the banks. This was the first attempt in history to create floating artillery. Under the scorching sun, amidst the noise of water and the screech of ropes, Roman soldiers saw their own inventions transform into a storm of elements: water, fire, metal, all combined in one strike. But the enemies learned quickly. The Persians reinforced their walls with towers of sun-dried brick, which absorbed the impact of stones. They began to use wooden shields covered with raw hides, and even built double walls with a gap to cushion direct hits. In response, the Romans increased the caliber of their machines, lengthened the levers, and strengthened the tension. Ballistas became larger and heavier, requiring dozens of men to operate. Each shot turned into a small spectacle: commands, signals, the creak of blocks, and then a discharge, as if the very sky was collapsing to earth. Historian Sayers wrote that by this time, ballistas had become not just weapons, but a symbol of an army's status. They were adorned with legion emblems, bronze eagles, inscriptions, SPQR, the Senate and people of Rome. In this was pride, almost religious reverence. Legionaries believed that each machine carried the will of the empire. When it fired, Rome itself fired. But it was this very confidence that played a cruel trick on them. During the Jewish revolt described by Josephus Flavius, the defenders of Jerusalem captured several Roman scorpions and used them against the besiegers. This came as a shock. For the first time, Romans found themselves under fire from their own weapons. Projectiles struck their camps, demolished towers, and brought the very death they had dealt to others. Caesar, once proud of his ballistas, would have turned into a ghost, watching the empire shoot itself. New security measures then emerged. Each legion now had guards for artillery positions, and tormentarii were obligated to destroy machines if there was a threat of their capture. Ballistas were no longer left unattended, even at night. They were covered with tarpaulins, and patrols guarded ammunition depots. Roman technology became increasingly sophisticated, but at the same time, increasingly vulnerable. And yet, despite this, ballistas remained the heart of Roman power. They participated in every major campaign: in the siege of Dura Europos, in the defense of Antioch, in the invasion of Britannia. In their shadow passed the lives of an entire generation of soldiers, accustomed to the smell of burnt wax and the sound of sinews tensioning. And if in early wars the hero held a sword, now the hero held the key to the ballista, the lever that unleashed the empire's wrath. But nothing is eternal, not even the power of metal. By the end of the 3rd century, new peoples, barbarians from the north, brought different methods of combat. Their avalanche knew no fear of machines because they struck quickly, suddenly, without formations. Against their swiftness, cumbersome ballistas seemed like giants stuck in the past. And then Rome began to understand. The art of war must change, otherwise its own inventions would become a symbol not of strength, but of decline. The empire trembled under the onslaught of Gothic tribes. Ballistas still thundered on the walls, but their voice already sounded weary. The machines, once the embodiment of reason and strength, now fired into emptiness. The enemy vanished before the stone reached its target. Engineers mended snapped ropes, legates called for discipline, But time itself weakened the bowstrings. The ballista, a child of logic, perished along with the order that gave it birth.